Claire Morton's name would forever be tied to the night she turned a quiet town into a war zone, ramming her black sedan into car after car as though the only way to survive was through destruction itself. The town was quiet, the kind of silence that settles when most people are home for the night, winding down after a long day. Streetlights flickered against the pavement, casting long shadows across the empty sidewalks. That peace shattered when the sound of screeching tires tore through the air, a black sedan darting into view with reckless speed. The car moved as though driven by panic itself, swerving across lanes and narrowly missing other vehicles until the first crash came. Metal clashed with metal, the echo of the impact reverberating across the block. Drivers slammed on their brakes, stunned as the black sedan tore forward, the front of the vehicle already mangled, yet pushing on as if destruction was its only fuel. What unsettled witnesses most was not just the speed, but the purpose. This was no accident, no careless driver losing control. The woman behind the wheel seemed intent on colliding, ramming into cars like obstacles in her path. Each hit sent fragments of headlights, mirrors, and glass scattering onto the road. People screamed from sidewalks, some clutching phones as they dialed emergency services, others frozen in disbelief at what they were seeing. The sedan surged forward again and again, plowing its way down the main avenue, leaving wreckage behind with every strike. Chaos spread quickly. Drivers abandoned their vehicles, some pulling children from the back seats as they fled to safety. A delivery truck jackknifed in an attempt to avoid her, blocking half the road, but the sedan slammed into it and forced its way past. Horns blared, alarms shrieked, and in the distance, the faint wail of police sirens began to rise, drawn to the storm unfolding in the streets. Still, the black sedan didn't stop. The driver pressed harder, ignoring smoke rising from the hood, ignoring sparks flickering under the crumpled body of the car. It was as though the vehicle itself had become a weapon, driven by someone who refused to slow down. The trail of destruction stretched block after block, leaving behind twisted vehicles with shattered windshields and terrified drivers stumbling out into the night air. The car clipped a motorcycle, sent it spinning into the curb, then collided head-on with a parked SUV before jolting backward, and continuing on, bouncing off cars like a trapped animal slamming against the walls of its cage. Every crash drew more attention, pulling crowds of horrified onlookers into the scene, some shouting warnings, others pulling out cameras to record the madness. By the time flashing lights from the first police cruiser appeared in the rear view, the damage was staggering. The sedan had already battered at least 5 vehicles, scattering them across the street like discarded toys. Officers expected a chase, but what they found was stranger, a driver who did not flee in a straight sprint, but chose instead to carve her escape through sheer destruction. It was chaos, raw and unrelenting. And though no one yet knew her name or her reason, the woman at the wheel had turned a quiet night into something unforgettable. Police quickly identified the black sedan, tracing its license plate back to a woman named Claire Morton. Her name was unfamiliar to most, a ghost among the records of the small suburban town. The discovery led officers to a modest rental house on a quiet street, where neighbors recalled seeing her only in passing. They described her as polite yet distant, always moving with purpose but never stopping long enough for conversation. Some said she often left early in the morning and returned late at night, her blinds always drawn, her lights switching on at odd hours. It was the kind of presence that existed without truly being noticed until something like this forced everyone to remember. Inside her house, investigators found more questions than answers. The living room was nearly empty, as though she had been preparing to leave. Cardboard boxes lined the floor, some sealed with tape, others half filled with clothes and personal belongings. In one corner, stacks of cash bundled in elastic bands were hidden inside a duffel bag, tucked beneath a pile of blankets. The kitchen counters were bare, except for unopened cans of food and bottled water, enough to suggest she had been planning for quick, simple meals. It wasn't at the home of someone building a life. It was the home of someone preparing to disappear. Detectives combed through her records and uncovered strange details. Claire had held an office job until 2 weeks before the night of chaos, when she abruptly quit without explanation. She hadn't filed for unemployment, hadn't applied for another position, and hadn't told her coworkers why she was leaving. Her sudden absence was marked by silence, as if she wanted to cut off every tie that could lead someone back to her. Even more unusual were the multiple disposable cell phones found in her bedroom drawer. Each phone had only a handful of contacts, many without names, just numbers. Some had been used only once before being discarded. The house was filled with an uneasiness, a tension that lingered in every room. On the desk in her bedroom, investigators found a collection of notes written on scraps of paper, scribbled with cryptic reminders. Some were dates and times. Others were just single words like warehouse or transfer. None of it made sense on its own, but it painted a picture of a woman caught in something far beyond a normal life. The emptiness of the house felt intentional, as if Claire had stripped away every part of herself that could be recognized or traced. Neighbors, now speaking with urgency, recalled how in the days before the rampage they had noticed unusual activity around her home. A black SUV had been parked on the corner more than once, its tinted windows concealing whoever sat inside. The vehicle never lingered for long, but its presence was unsettling. Some thought it belonged to a friend, others dismissed it as coincidence. But after that night, every memory of the SUV took on a sharper, more menacing edge. As detectives pieced these fragments together, they realized that Claire Morton wasn't simply a woman who had lost control. She was someone who had been running long before her car struck the first vehicle. Her life had been dismantled piece by piece, and whatever had driven her into the streets that night was not chaos born of impulse, but something deliberate, something dangerous, and something far from over. Security footage began to reveal the hours before the black sedan erupted into the streets. Cameras scattered across town showed Claire's movements in fragments, each clip like a puzzle piece of her desperate path. The first image appeared near an abandoned warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. Her car sat parked in the shadows, headlights off, as though she was waiting. Minutes later, another vehicle entered the frame, a dark SUV with tinted windows that concealed whoever was inside. It did not pass by or turn away, it stopped. And when Claire's sedan finally pulled out of the lot, the SUV followed close behind, never losing sight. Investigators tracked both vehicles through traffic cameras as they wound toward the city. Every turn Claire made, the SUV mirrored. The pursuit was methodical, not reckless, not random. By the time she reached the busier streets, the chase tightened, forcing her into choices that looked like panic, but carried intention. What witnesses thought was madness now looked like strategy. Her ramming into cars was a way to slow down her pursuer, to create blockades of twisted metal between her and the SUV. Each collision wasn't only about escape, but about survival. She knew she was being hunted. The SUV became the most critical lead in the case, yet when police searched for its license plate, the images blurred, grainy and unreadable. Attempts to enhance the footage showed the numbers had been deliberately obscured. No trace of the vehicle turned up in local registrations, traffic stops, or toll crossings. It was as though the SUV belonged to no one, a phantom machine that existed only in that chase. That mystery deepened the fear surrounding Claire's actions. Detectives turned back to the crash sites themselves. Witnesses confirmed seeing the black sedan repeatedly hit vehicles, but some also recalled glimpsing another car behind her, shadowing her path through the destruction. Others insisted they had seen nothing, as though the SUV vanished in the chaos once police lights flooded the scene. That uncertainty fed speculation. Was the SUV real, or had panic twisted the perception of those who watched? The footage said otherwise. It had been there, following, closing in, then slipping away when the time was right. Investigators considered another possibility. If Claire had enemies powerful enough to track her, then perhaps they also had the means to erase evidence, to conceal a vehicle, to make something tangible appear invisible in the official record. The thought unsettled everyone working the case. A chase that should have left clear tracks instead left shadows, raising questions about who had been pursuing her and why they vanished when police closed in. Forensic teams returned to her battered sedan, searching for proof of the pursuit. On the back bumper, they found deep scrapes, pressure marks that matched the front grille of a larger vehicle. The damage was not caused by her collisions alone. It was the unmistakable sign of being rammed from behind. That evidence confirmed what the cameras had already suggested. Claire Morton had not been alone on the road that night. She was being forced forward, battered into desperation, her wild rampage less an attack and more a frantic attempt to outrun whoever had found her. The discovery of the USB drive hidden in Claire's car shifted the investigation into darker territory. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary flash drive, tucked inside a small compartment beneath the passenger seat. But once decrypted, its contents revealed layers of documents, spreadsheets, and emails pointing to something much larger than one woman's frantic escape. The files detailed financial irregularities, coded transfers between offshore accounts, and evidence of shipments that never appeared on public records. The name of a powerful corporation surfaced again and again, tied to contractors, politicians, and executives whose influence stretched far beyond the small town where the chase had unfolded. Investigators realized that Claire had been gathering this information for months, maybe even years. The metadata on the files showed they had been created on different devices, suggesting she moved between computers, carefully copying and storing everything she found. Some documents carried watermarks belonging to her former employer, which meant her ordinary office job had likely been a cover for something else. Whether she was acting on her own or under the guidance of someone higher up, she had crossed into a world where information was as dangerous as a weapon. As the pieces fit together, a new picture of Claire began to form. She wasn't simply a woman unraveling under pressure. She was a whistleblower, someone who had uncovered crimes powerful people wanted buried. The dark SUV that trailed her now seemed less like a random pursuer and more like a shadow sent to silence her before she could share what she had found. The reckless collisions that night no longer appeared meaningless, but instead desperate maneuvers to keep herself alive for just a little longer. The files painted an unsettling story of corruption. Millions of dollars had been funneled through shell companies. Shipping manifests suggested that cargo labeled as harmless equipment was instead filled with restricted materials, items meant to be hidden from regulators and authorities. Names of public officials appeared in coded correspondence, hinting at bribes and influence bought to keep everything running smoothly. For investigators, it was overwhelming. For Claire, it had been a death sentence. The more they studied the evidence, the more they realized she must have been under surveillance long before the night she rammed through traffic. The SUV had likely been one of many eyes on her. Neighbors' reports of vehicles parked nearby, unexplained figures loitering on her street, and her sudden resignation from work all began to align. Claire had known they were closing in, and the chaos she created on the roads may have been her last attempt to disrupt a capture she knew was inevitable. Federal agencies were alerted once the significance of the USB became clear. The scope of the information reached beyond local law enforcement's capacity, and soon higher authorities took over, examining every file and connection. The sense of unease deepened as they realized how carefully Claire had hidden her findings. She seemed to know they would be hunted even after her disappearance. What remained unanswered was whether she had intended to hand them over or if someone else was meant to find them in her absence. Claire's car was found abandoned on the outskirts of town, battered almost beyond recognition. The hood was twisted upward, glass from shattered windows scattered across the dirt, and the tires shredded from the violent chase. Blood stained the driver's seat and steering wheel, but there was no sign of Claire herself. Search teams spread out across the area, combing through fields and wooded trails. Yet no footprints, no discarded belongings, no trace of her departure could be found. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the wreckage of her desperate escape. The unanswered questions multiplied. If she had been taken by those pursuing her, why leave the car behind? If she had escaped on her own, how had she disappeared without a single trace? Investigators debated both possibilities, but neither explanation provided comfort. Locals whispered theories of abduction, of shadowy men in the black SUV finally cornering her in the night. Others believed she had staged her disappearance, using the chaos of the collisions and the confusion of flashing lights to slip away unnoticed. The mystery of her fate deepened with each passing day. Weeks later, sealed envelopes began arriving at government agencies and investigative offices across the country. Each contained copies of the files recovered from the USB drive, along with additional documents that had not been found in her car. The packages were anonymous, sent from different locations, carefully untraceable. Their arrival proved that whoever controlled the information was still out there. Whether it was Claire herself or an ally working on her behalf remained unclear. The documents sparked federal investigations, pulling powerful figures into the spotlight and forcing answers from people who had long avoided accountability. Despite the progress, the sense of unease never faded. The SUV that had chased Claire was never located and no suspects were ever identified. The corporation implicated in the documents denied involvement, deflecting blame and pointing to fabricated evidence. Yet the files spoke for themselves. Bribes, fraud, and smuggling operations unraveled piece by piece as investigators dug deeper. Careers crumbled, and reputations shattered. But the core of the network remained hidden, its leaders still protected in the shadows. For the people who had witnessed that terrifying night on the streets, the memory remained vivid. They recalled the sound of metal tearing, the sight of a car slamming head-on into anything in its way, and the image of a woman who seemed driven not by rage, but by fear. To them, Claire Morton became more than a fugitive or a victim. She was a symbol of someone fighting forces too large to face directly. Her collisions were not the actions of a reckless driver, but the desperate last stand of a woman who refused to be silenced. Months turned into years, and still no trace of Claire was found. Some claimed she lived under a new identity, watching from afar as the truth she uncovered continued to spread. Others insisted she was gone, silenced by the same powers she had tried to expose. Whatever the truth, the night she turned her car into a weapon left scars not only on the streets, but on the story of corruption she risked everything to reveal. And though her body was never found, her legacy endured in the chaos she left behind.